You got a witness. You don't want a witness on the thing, it's the guy that hit her. How could the guy that hit her be a witness? Yeah, yeah. Oh, so she's.
I'd like to call the Planning Zoning Committee, Zoning and Building Committee of May 8th to order, please. Would the minute taker please call the roll?
Alderman Wesley.
Here.
Alderman Police.
Here.
Alderman Lewiton.
Here.
Alderman Shockey.
Here.
Alderman Cadella.
Here.
Alderman Winger. Here. Alderman Coles.
Here.
Alderman Knight.
I'd like to make a motion, that everybody is here that is able to. I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes of April 24th, 2008.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Next item is report and recommendation on the brick ordinance. I'd like to hand that to Mr. Klinger.
Okay. Good evening. Before you tonight, we've been asked to look into the concept of a brick ordinance. Whether or not this should be written into our municipal code for future construction. So before you tonight, we have a few questions that we'd like answered to see if this one is appropriate for us to look into. And if so, what type of regulations would the council be looking to have? So the questions that we have is, should these regulations apply, and should they apply to residential, commercial, and industrial properties? What percentage of requirement for brick, and on what sides of the structure should these requirements be imposed? And if applied to residential properties, should the regulations be imposed on new construction only, or should they be applied to additions and improvements which exceed a certain percentage of value of the original structure? Some things to consider in this when looking at brick regulations, and that one of the first concerns or implications that this may have is it may affect the affordability of construction. Now, I have a few pictures to show of some of these issues. Now, it's very difficult to show affordability through construction, but I did just want to show this particular house. This house recently came through the council to get a variation to build on this particular lot. The residents who wanted this house constructed needed a ranch constructed for medical reasons, and things along that nature. They did work into their budget the brick on the front of the structure. That was not a requirement, but it was something they felt they needed to do. However, they did state that if they were required to add more brick or additional brick on the sides, it would have made the project unaffordable to them. So that is a concern, is that affordability may prevent people from, if we do have a masonry requirement or a brick requirement, may actually prevent some people from constructing in the city of Wooddale. Another concern or possible implication is neighborhood character. Again, depending on how the regulations are written, if we have a very high percentage of masonry requirement, as you can see in the slide I have up there, where we have a 100% brick house in between two framed houses. One of the things that we are going to be working on very diligently in our UDO zoning code rewrite is tear downs to make sure that they have the appropriate neighborhood character. It's just something to consider as we're going through, because the amount of brick can impact that. Also, just because you have a requirement for brick doesn't necessarily mean the structure is going to really look great. This is a property that's unincorporated, and it is a 100% brick house, and I'll be honest, I don't think it looks all that good. The other implication of having a brick regulation is it could potentially impact design freedom of the architects, builders, and property owners. If there's a masonry requirement, this house most likely would not have been built. It has some stone accents, but it is actually all cedar shake sided. It was the desire of the homeowner and builder to have that done as cedar shake siding. This house was recently done. It looks like it's been there for approximately 100 years, I believe. The house really, I think they did a great job in making it look like a very well-established house that has been there for a very long time. But depending on the type of regulations that we impose, this house may or may not have been allowed, since that is an ephes or stucco structure siding that's on the house. So that may or may not be allowed with a
1 minute.
brick and
1 minute.
masonry
1 minute.
regulations. Yes, sir.
That house is on
Alderman
Sunnyside, in
Coles.
case anybody wants to see that house. That was a tear down, well, actually a tear down that they put this house up.
Yep.
That has a masonry on the outside.
It's a stucco, so that
Stucco,
it
yeah,
becomes,
yeah.
would that be
Yeah.
permittable? There's also very
Oh, yeah.
unique houses that are built in town. Some people really love this house, some people really hate it. But
Yeah.
if there was a
Higher
masonry
water.
requirement, that house may or may not have been allowed to been built.
Another thing, I talked to the guy that was building that. That's a California-style house, has an indoor swimming pool inside. It's marvelous on the inside. I've been in the inside of it before the person that lives there comes in. But it's a beautiful house on the inside.
Some of the other things to just consider with this, if it's applied to industrial properties, especially in industrial, the trend with large structures is to build them as fast and as affordable as possible, especially when you're talking these large structures such as maybe the Osco warehouse that's on Wooddale Road, or even some of the Gulo buildings along Wooddale Road. If they were to have a masonry requirement, it would obviously add cost to their project. It would obviously also add time to their project. And in these types of projects where the tenant space or the prospective user of the building wants to get in and start using their facility and using it quick, it again could potentially cost us development. So those are things to consider with it. From a staff perspective, I don't think we would be completely against a brick regulation. We would just like to know what the guidelines that the council would like to see us bring forward with them. The staff would personally recommend that industrial properties either have a minimum requirement for masonry, or that treatments to a concrete panel, which is what the typical construction that's used in industrial now is, a pre-stressed concrete panel, that maybe surface treatments to that pre-stressed concrete panel be allowed to meet a masonry requirement. If there's any questions that anyone has, or if anybody else up here would like to add anything.
Thank you, Mr. Clicker. That was, I think, an excellent overview. Does anybody have any questions about any of those specific items that Mr. Clicker just went over? Alderman Wesley.
I'm the one that asked for this to be put on the agenda. I do have some ideas that I want to bounce off to council, and I did meet with John and Ross on these issues. Reason why we're looking for this brick ordinance is that organization came forward, I believe in November, and gave us a presentation saying that they would write the ordinance for free. Question is, with the construction going on in the community now that will be going on, and with the West Corridor study going on possibly down the line here, we need to put something in place for the brick ordinance. And I felt it was the best thing to do. I have some suggestions on a house, residential house, it should be 25% brick. You know, where 25% brick on a M1. And it could be masonry, it could be the stone, you know, masonry. And the other thing should be 85, the industrial should be 85. The problem is, John did bring to my point that with these panels, that they have a certain thing that they can make out of these panels and make it look like brick. So I would like to see the 85, okay, residential 25, and an M1 at 25. I don't think that's asking for a lot. Keep in mind that if a person comes in and wants to add on to their house, I'm not saying that they have to go with the 25% brick. All I'm saying is that they have to, if they do add on their house, that they have to put the material that they have up there now, like on their siding and that. I'm not penalizing the people that wants to do add-on. I'm looking at the tear downs, that they go 25% brick. I'm looking at, you know, we never did talk about multifamily. That should be 85%, because most times it's you know, 2 stories. I'm in favor of passing ordinance here. Those are my suggestions that I'm bringing out to you. I have talked to the building department on this. They felt, obviously, Russ thinks he wants some ideas here. I think, and on Thorndale Road, my opinion, we're gonna have to do overlay district up in the Thorndale corridor, because simple reason is, and it was brought to my attention, if a hotel comes in, and I drove through Rosemont, it's a lot of windows and all that glass. So on the Thorndale corridor, we would have to do an overlay district and revamp that. So those are my suggestions, and then also it's in a B4, which will be 85%. That will still give them the 20% or whatever to do their marble at the top or whatever. Those are my suggestions. I'd like to see that drawn up in an ordinance to be passed, or have staff proceed with the ordinance and adopt the ordinance before major construction starts. Thank you.
I do like the idea, Mr. Clicker, of the design freedom, not giving complete freedom after looking at some of the houses that you showed. So for tear downs especially and rebuilds, they should fit into the neighborhood. And I'm not sure exactly how much brick that should be all the time. Should it necessarily be 25% for R1 or R3? We do have, matter of fact, I think a good way to do this very quickly is to look at the recommendations that we received for the B4 commercial district and use it as a guide for the building code amendments. The multiple dwelling units in B4, does anybody want to mention anything about those? Mr. Coles,
No, I want to talk about something else.
about, go ahead.
Something else, about M1s on the concrete slabs that they're using, like they use them for the roofs, they use them for the sidings and everything like. They're more fireproof than just the plain brick, I think. Is that right, John?
Well, I think as far as fireproof goes, they're pretty equivalent, brick masonry or
Yeah.
the precast concrete panels. But they can, as Alderman Wesley mentioned earlier, and I believe as Mr. Clicker mentioned, what we can do if we want to require a certain percentage being like a decorative facade, what they can do when they're making these precast panels, they can do one of two things. They can either pour them into a form that has an inlay in there, that has a brick pattern or a stone pattern, or the other thing that they do is they actually can lay bricks into the form prior to them placing the concrete in those panels. So
got
it'll
one
have a
that-
different appearance than just a concrete slab.
Okay, I got one other question. The National Building Code book, what does that say? You guys should know that. You got the book. We don't have the book.
The building code doesn't really put limitations on the type of building materials you have to use per se. You can build pretty much any type of structure out of any variety of materials, but what it does do is it limits the size of those structures depending on the type of materials that you use. If you're going to use combustible framing, you're limited square footage and height-wise. They also require that exterior walls of certain types of buildings have a certain fire rating, which the easiest and the most efficient way to achieve that, of course, is to use masonry or, the precast concrete panels. So that is pretty standard in the industry.
One more question. When Pulte was putting up there, we not forced them, but we asked them if they would put 75% brick, if I remember right, when they built them townhouses up there, on the first floor, around, and then the panels, and up above. But I think that's what we asked them to do, because they were only gonna do it in the front.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact percentage
Yeah,
off
I
the top
thought
of my
I
head.
thought it was 75% on the first
That
floor.
may be, I'd have to go back and check.
Yeah.
I believe what they did do, though, and as far as fire safety and, the type of materials, the siding that they did use, a siding that's really coming into its own these days and is being used. I believe Lennar used it on their buildings, and a lot of, even the single-family builders are using it as a siding that's actually made out of a cement board, so it's non-combustible.
Yeah.
It lasts quite a long time and sort of keeps its appearance.
Okay.
So there are a lot of new materials that are being used today.
That's all I wanted to know.
So, Mr. Nowak, please.
Thank you, Chairman Shalkey. One of the things I did want to mention before getting any further along is that the adoption of this ordinance, I believe that this, whatever is decided upon, needs to be placed in the municipal code, the City of Woodhaven Municipal Code under the building section,
Right.
and not in the zoning code.
Yes.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any problem with that, by the way? Alderman Felice?
Question on the warehouses, John. If we say masonry construction, you know, whether it's brick or those prefab walls, that's all masonry, isn't it?
Correct.
I mean, we're not saying 25% decorative brick.
No, but I think if something, again, to consider and to discuss is whether or not you want the exterior facade of some of these buildings to look like something other than just a slab of concrete. That's why I'm saying they do have ways now of making these precast panels where they don't look like a piece of precast concrete. They would look like a brick wall or a stone wall, something like that. So maybe, you know, the section of the building, for example, where the offices are going to be that type of a thing, you know, give them, say, well, you know what, this X percentage of the facade of the building has to have, you know, an appearance other than a slab of concrete.
Can I continue?
You want to follow up on that?
I just had a couple of points.
Go ahead. First, let me ask, though, if anybody has any problem with putting this in as a building code rather than into the zoning. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Police.
I like the idea of 25% for the residential. I had the opportunity, when I built my house, it was all siding or brick, and I chose probably 75 to 80% brick, and the second floor I did cedar. It was a little more expensive, but you know what? The maintenance and everything is a lot easier to handle. As far as the, you know, character and everything, I mean, I'm not saying it has to be all brick on one side or this, you know, they can choose. And as far as when we're saying brick, we mean whatever, stone, you got the stones, the boulders. I don't think anybody's going to use marble or anything like that, but maybe an Italian, yeah. Like myself, you know. But as far as right. You know, I think, you know, when you got a combination of something, it does give, I think it gives plenty of character. This whole thing started when we were talking about the B4. Everybody, you know, we had some expert who gave a presentation that one night, and he was saying, well, you know, you guys should do more of a brick in the B4. And so then we ended up seeing some people from the brick council or whatever, and we got more ideas, and that's why we're trying to expand on this. Like the B4, I think, should be 85%. That's your business district and whatnot. As far as the warehouses, you know, I'd like to see a nice little something at around the front office, and then, you know, the sides are going to be the sides. They're going to be the prefab walls. And as far as hotels, you know, they're mostly marble, granite, glass, and steel. You're not going to get a lot of brick there. But I kind of like the idea of moving along and, you know, something.
Okay, so we're saying that light industrial or M1 would be as quoted in the papers you gave us? 80% brick, stone, approved masonry material, glass, or any combination thereof. You could work with those guidelines? Yes, Mr. Forrest.
Other than some of the, I think we have a handful of buildings in the industrial park that are steel-sided with cladding as, for their exterior walls, they use the steel. I think just about all of the buildings in the industrial park are 100% masonry.
Right.
So I can't think of another building material other than steel that they would use in the industrial park to build an industrial building. So, I mean, you could almost go to 100%, I would think, with the masonry requirement on industrial.
So when you say 100% masonry, it would include some steel?
It would be the precast panels. However, just wanted to ask a question on this one. If we are just saying precast panels in the industrial park are acceptable masonry construction, again, I don't have a problem, I don't think anybody would have a problem with, at this table, saying that the requirement should be 85 or even higher percentage. However, if we go through the definition that's presented from the Brick Council, it states in here that approved masonry materials shall be textured in coloring. The coloring of all materials shall be integral to the product and not painted on the surface of said product. So if they were to come out with a blank concrete slab, pre-stressed concrete wall and painted it, that would not be acceptable to these proposed regulations. So that's where we need to define if we're gonna just accept pre-stressed concrete panels that come out of the factory as a natural state, or do we want a textured or colored finish applied to them, and if so, at what percentage?
I wouldn't think we would want a colored finish applied, because that sounds temporary. Doesn't sound like it would last.
They can integrate it into the
If they do
process
that.
where they can actually do the color into the concrete rather than painting it. The standard practice right now is to come out with the natural surface and paint it.
Right.
That would, according to the definitions given to us by the Brick Council, would not fall into the category of masonry construction. So that's where we just need to ask, would you like to go with the masonry, or the Brick Council definition of what approved masonry is? If so, in the industrial park, I think along the range of 25 to 30% would be acceptable then in that case, of a texture or finish, because again, we're talking a 500,000 square foot building, as Alderman Police said. Up around the office area should maybe look a little more attractive and a little more finished. And then when you get into the loading dock area and everything along that nature, the natural or raw precast panel may be acceptable.
Yeah, I'm just thinking now about the one auto store that has blue. Is that a baked enamel on this cedar or the concrete? Yeah. Or is that painted on? Is that a temporary thing, basically, or permanent?
That is actually an epoxy-based paint product, and it's similar to the product used by the developer Gullo when he has done a few buildings here in town. He has applied this particular coating to accent the concrete panels. I believe one of which is a stripe around the building, approximately 3 feet high, possibly 8 or 10 feet from the top of the roof line, and it's somewhat attractive. It all depends on everyone's taste.
It does depend on taste. Alderman Cadella, you had a comment.
Yeah, I think Ross started to hit on it. I just, he said that the prefab pre-stressed concrete panels are not within the brick industry standards, and considering that the brick industry is the brick industry, I mean, they're obviously pushing for brick probably even more so than a stone or another masonry product. And there's benefits, to the city and going along with their definitions. I'm starting to rethink the masonry in DM zoning. Maybe some for decorative purposes, but I certainly wouldn't want to redefine, make Wooddale's definition of what is allowable masonry different than what is standard practice. Not only because I don't want to go against the grain with the construction industry, that's not that big of a deal to me, but if we were to allow those prefab panels, then we might see them in B4, and I don't think we want to see them there. So I think we really do want to keep some definition separation between masonry and those panels. And therefore, staff's recommendation to reduce the percentage of masonry in the M zoning probably does make a lot of sense, because essentially it is a different product. As Joe began to point out, and John confirmed, they're equally fireproof. I mean, they're probably equally efficient. on an M zone building. Perhaps the concrete panel even more so, just for efficiency of dollars spent and rate of speed of construction. But I really do want to keep those separated because I'd hate to see those things start popping up in B4. So thank you.
The neighborhood character again, so it would fit in with everything else in that B4 section. Mr. Forrest.
Thank you. 2 points that I just wanted to cover quickly. As far as the 25% in the residential zoned areas, I think that makes a lot of sense, and it's very consistent with a lot of the more common building practices today. I mean, you're trying to weigh creating some character in town and having buildings that are going to be of good value, yet at the same time, you still want to keep things somewhat affordable. And starting all the way with the foundation, if you're going to go with a frame house with siding, as opposed to a masonry house, I mean, you're talking differences between an 8-inch wide foundation and a 10-inch wide foundation. So you're talking off right out of the box. You're starting to increase your costs for the construction of this home. You know, it could be as much as 20%. So I think the 25% of brick or masonry on a residence is starting to become more of a standard practice today. That allows the builders to, do the front. Typically, they'll do the whole front facade of the house will be in brick or masonry, and then maybe they'll even wrap the front corners, but then they'll finish the sides and the back of the house with some type of siding. The other point that I wanted to make is our building code currently contains and has for several years a requirement that all buildings in the commercial zoning districts be of masonry construction. So we have to either incorporate that phrase, I would think, into this ordinance, or just take it out of there and then have this new ordinance govern that. Our interpretation through the years of masonry construction, because we have had to deal with some existing buildings, has also included and accepted drive-it. Taco Bell's a perfect example. It's a drive-it building. When they redid the facades at Georgetown, those are all drive-it. So again, if you want drive-it included or not included in the masonry, that's another thing to keep in mind when you're writing the ordinance for the commercial districts.
What do you call that again that they use in Georgetown?
Drive-it,
Drive it?
it's the artificial stucco.
Is that a lot more inexpensive than regular stucco?
Well, it's an improved product over the regular stucco. True stucco is a lot softer than this product. This product has a longer life to it.
Oh, it does?
They can put it up over the foam insulation board and just put their base layer and then go with their finish coat.
So the life of the product is longer than stucco?
It doesn't need as much maintenance as traditional stucco.
Okay. Alderman Felice.
I just want to make a comment. When we're doing like add-ons or whatnot, an addition to a house, if we do 25% residential, let's say it's a frame house and it's all vinyl siding, naturally, guys putting an addition on, we're not going to say, well, now the addition has to be 25% of the house. It should hold it in, the nature of the house, whatever they have, that's what it should be. It doesn't become all of a sudden 25%. Okay.
Alderman Cadella.
A few words on Drive It, at the risk of having the Drive It people come after me. First, I would really like to not include Drive It, or sometimes known as EFIS, as considered as a masonry product. The product in and of itself, I've dealt with it, I've worked with it. It's good. It doesn't have the lifespan of true masonry, but it is better than the stuff they were trying to pass off 20, 25 years ago. But I think true stucco was originally a Portland product, which is really, really hard, which goes typically over a masonry substrate and pretty much lasts forever if applied right. Move forward 100 years to Drive It /EFIS. It has a pretty good lifespan, but this stuff is really dependent on correct installation. And I've seen a lot of incorrect installation. So, it's not that the building department wouldn't be doing you guys wouldn't be doing your job, but it's tough to be there every day as these guys are preparing the substrate. I don't want to necessarily outlaw it because I know that a lot of architects use this as a design element and accent element. But boy, oh boy, I sure would not want to include that in our masonry percentages and therefore restrict the amount they can put on a building or make them apply it over masonry. So, that's my thoughts on that subject.
Mr. Ford?
Yeah, Alderman Cadella makes a very good point. With the drive-it, it's essential that it be applied correctly, and it's my understanding that the installers of drive-it actually have to pass a class given by the manufacturer. If they don't, and they go out to the site and put it on, the manufacturer will not cover it with a warranty. So there are a lot of variables with that. It's sensitive, very weather sensitive when it's being applied. So I don't think I have to agree with him on that.
So that should not be included in the brick or masonry part. Unless we have any other questions, I'd like to see our department come across with some building code amendments to bring back to us and give you what dating would you consider as reasonable? Because there'll be a lot of work on this.
Yeah, considering with everything that we do have coming up recently, or in the near future, June, the second meeting in June, could definitely have it in front of
Would
you.
that be okay with everybody here?
Yes.
For sure, the second week of June? Alderman Wesley?
I have one question. Are you asking them to look at the recommendations that I made or the council made, or?
It's based on the comments that everybody's been making here. I've been taking notes, and I believe I have a fairly good representation of what the council is asking for, and I can have that for
And
you
what,
back in an ordinance.
what Sharon Armstrong gave us as her
Starting
recommendations
with
for
that
the
as a guide,
before.
yes.
Pardon me? June 26th. Now, in the meantime, any of the aldermen can meet with Mr. Clicker or Mr. Nowak or Mr. Forrest with any ideas or comments or, what they'd like to see in there. Yes, sir.
Yes, Chairman, I just didn't want to lock ourselves into that date because it's been kind of standard the past couple of years that in the summer months, we may not have the second committee
Ah.
in the summer month, like for June and July with the holidays and stuff. So within the next couple of committees, we'll get that done. I just didn't want to lock it into a specific date.
Okay, we'll be looking forward to seeing what you have put together in the next 3 to 4 weeks. Is that reasonable? And again, anybody who wants to meet with our gentleman out here to make comments and to make suggestions, please do. And if there's anything really exotic about what they're talking about, I would say, let us know about it so we can think about it too. But my part of it that I'd like to see is that neighborhood character thing. The tear downs and rebuilds, some of those pictures we saw just didn't fit into the neighborhood, so I'd like to make sure that that doesn't happen in the future.
Well, it could be quite honest with you, that's a much bigger issue with this, and that is already being worked on by our consultants who are doing the zoning code rewrite or the UDO.
That Alderman Cadella and myself are working with
Right,
too,
we're
yes.
working on that, and actually we'll be meeting with them shortly to see their first draft of some proposals on it.
Okay. Matter of fact, you'll let Mr. Alderman Cadella and myself know when that meeting is, so to
Certainly.
make sure we can attend. Thank you. Any other comments about that item? So the recommendation we have is that staff will come back to us in 3 to 4 weeks with what they recommend as the changes in the building code. Next item is a report and recommendation on the tree preservation ordinance. There was a question that came up about this. Mr. Acting City Manager, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I was asked to put this in the packet. There were a couple questions on when the tree preservation ordinance was appropriate. And according to the wording of the ordinance, it would be in instances of any new construction or the layout of the building interferes with any current trees that are in place. And this would be for new construction or a tear down and then rebuild that would expand into an existing area of trees. There was some questions on, once again, where this would be applied, and if we want to make changes to that ordinance, we could do that.
But right now, they have to, for new or tear down and rebuild,
Where
if the
it
footing
expands,
of that
yeah.
building is changed, they would have to submit a tree.
Tree preservation plan approved
Okay.
by an arborist.
Okay, any questions? Anybody? Alderman Cadella.
Sorry to waste time, but I'd maybe like a quick history lesson. It's my understanding that either this ordinance or a earlier version of it at one point pertained to all private property, all trees, regardless of pending annexation or potential new construction. I believe it was repealed by a previous city council. Can anybody give a little background as to why that happened? And can anybody up on this council give a little feedback to if we might consider bringing that back? Because I would certainly support that strongly.
Mr. Forrest.
Thank you. As I recall, yeah, this was in the early mid-1990s, shortly after the Mr. T incidents, if you remember that.
Shortly after what?
The Mr. T incident
Oh,
in Lake
okay.
Forest, where he clear-cut
Okay.
his property, much
Right.
to the chagrin of his neighbors. But the council at the time did pass an ordinance. And off the top of my head, I don't remember if it was trees with a diameter greater than 10 inches or 12 inches on private property. If you wanted to remove it, you had to come in and apply for a permit. And if the tree was not diseased or dying or had been hit by lightning, the permit could either be refused, or you would have had to come back and replace that tree with, a couple